Wow, what a dominant performance from South Africa. They put the world on notice with a record 35-7 win over rivals New Zealand. What a statement towards the World Cup. South Africa with 7 forwards on the bench as well, never seen before, and they all came on and had a massive impact. They completely dominated New Zealand. Plenty of interesting points from this game which we'll get into. I will say the only downside for South Africa is this wasn't a World Cup game, and the only positive for New Zealand is this wasn't a World Cup game. So let's get into this first half, because for the first 18 minutes, like a distinct phase of this game, it was all South African possession and territory, loads and loads of pressure on New Zealand, and New Zealand fought pretty hard, but they just couldn't resist in the end. And it all started actually from a dodgy kick from Faf de Klerk, but then the South African scrum came to the rescue, and that started the spell of penalties. They won so many penalties, and they literally got to the 22 and they stayed there. They just made New Zealand tackle and tackle and tackle. I mean, not many sides could resist for that long, to be fair, but the pressure was going to tell because they were very patient. And New Zealand, early signs that they were over-ambitious with their exit plays. They did this again and again. They didn't clear their lines and play up in the South African half. They tried to overplay. On a greasy day, their skills weren't up to scratch. So that's a big one for New Zealand. They tried to play the ball, they tried to offload, and they just weren't skillful enough. I mean, it was a strong defensive line from New Zealand, some good scrums, some good maul defence actually, but they just kept leaking penalties. So it's no good having a good defence if you're giving away penalties, because penalties are absolute killers. They got in yellow card danger pretty early and got an early yellow for Scott Barrett, copping one for the team there. And their best tight head, Tyrell Lomax, goes off and it looks like a nasty knee injury. That's bad news for New Zealand. Fletcher Newell gets a big test in this game. Now, I made a note at this point, Damian Willemse, who is playing 15 instead of their normal 15, LaRue, shows really good signs in attack. He is a better attacker than LaRue for sure, if that's what they want from a 15, and he showed that with an early really good counter-attack. But that pressure just kept on building against New Zealand. Physically, again, they were making good tackles with New Zealand, but they still kept conceding penalties, and that means there's going to be another yellow, which there was to Sam Cane. So, against 30 men, you just can't keep holding out. I mean, it's been 50 minutes non-stop pressure at this point, penalty after penalty in that danger zone. And finally, a really good finish, actually. Khaleesi is helped over with a big latch from Etzebeth. Patient and powerful, 0-7, and New Zealand already down to 13 men. So that was a bitter blow for that first part of the game. So South Africa just happy to be patient when New Zealand were at their freshest and just wore them down. New Zealand, early signs of overplaying. I mean, tactically, South Africa completely got it right in this game. New Zealand kept going with their game plan that wasn't working and only really went more direct in the last phase of the game. Anyway, the next 5 minutes were a bit messy, but New Zealand did manage to survive and get up to 15 players, so that was the most important thing. But I do like when New Zealand were down to 13 players, South Africa did change up their tactics very quickly and tried to move the ball around towards space, although they couldn't get a try from it. But, New Zealand just not helping themselves. Geordie Barrett with a bad miss one-on-one tackle when South Africa weren't really going anywhere. Esterhuizen just ran straight through him, so that's a big plus for Esterhuizen, who again ran very strongly in this game. Early on, the line-out battle was pretty well contested, but later on in the game, South Africa really got on top. Now, it takes a good 26 minutes for New Zealand really just to get their hands on the ball and the chance to play, but because they've been starved of that possession, they really forced it. I mean, they were trying to offload through the forwards, but just go one too many in these wet conditions, and it just goes to ground. And also, South Africa were getting up in the passing lanes really well, because I think they know these offloads are coming. Moody picks off a good offload at this point. And pretty smart stuff from Khaleesi, because he's just happy for keeping New Zealand defending in their own half, not taking the 3 points at goal, which were on offer, which would have given New Zealand an easy out. Just keep them in jail, keep the pressure on, and occasionally they try and whiz the ball wide. And to be fair to New Zealand, they did defend the wide spaces fairly well early on in the game. But what does pressure do? It frustrates, and New Zealand go for broke far too early once again, try and run from deep whilst under pressure, greasy conditions, and once again in the passing lane, this time Arenza, to score the intercept try. So really smart defence from South Africa, really basically impatient play, I should say, from New Zealand. So 14-0, yeah, and that's twice that's happened, too desperate in the offloads. Last few minutes of the half, New Zealand finally get the chance to attack and get a bit of flow going, but Scott Barrett ruins it. The ruck's not really doing much, there's not much to clear out, but Scott Barrett goes needlessly in with an illegal clear. Doesn't need doing. It's his second yellow, so that's a red. It doesn't get a straight red, so 2 yellow, so I don't think he gets banned for that. But 14-man New Zealand do string together their best attack of the game finally in that last bit of the first half. Talea, Bowden Barrett do actually skip through a few tackles, which was decent, and it does look like Jordan has scored, which maybe would get them back in the game, but Talea has just knocked on, so that was an absolute killer, because South Africa see out the half there 14-0, so very dominant, very controlled from South Africa, lots of possession, lots of territory, New Zealand just forcing it too much. So the last thing I wrote in the first half were New Zealand overplaying, and what do they do straight away in the second half? They overplay again, from deep again. Instead of a simple clearance kick, they overplay, which forces Geordie Barrett into a terrible shank clearance. And they've been peppered with straight mauls in the first half. They're expecting the big drive, but South Africa break off early from the maul, down the blind, put Marks in, who hasn't joined them all. So really smart stuff. We've got Aaron Smith trying to defend, I think it's Khaleesi and Marks. Impossible job. Ruthless from South Africa. Try, so that is 21-0. On 45 minutes, Moody shows once again he's a real danger, nicking the ball away from Ioane with his boot and then showing his pace to beat all the cover, but it's not a try because he was offside from that ruck, but just shows the danger of Moody, getting him a bit closer in at 13, gets his hands on the ball a bit more. And then on 47 minutes, on come all 7 South African forwards all at once and munch a scrum straight away. New Zealand once again forcing the offload, this time Takiaho under great pressure from 3 South African tacklers, and he throws the ball terribly to Jordan, who has to try and chuck it back in, and it comes to nothing. We do get a yellow for Peter Steph du Toit for a high tackle, but he was dipping, the tackler was dipping. It's a little unfortunate. It is a yellow, but only a yellow because it stays that way from the bunker review, so nothing really too bad there. Now let's make a note on this New Zealand game plan, which is dependent on good handling, but in slippery conditions they need high skill level to do it, and the skill level just isn't there. But they're not changing, they're not going direct, or they can't get over the gain line, they're not kicking for territory, and it's just going from bad to worse. So definitely a tactical mistake there from New Zealand, not adapting as well. And South Africa immediately capitalised on such a mistake with another powerful maul play, Mbonambi powering over 28-0. It's an absolute massacre at this point with 20 minutes to go. And another note, my big watch area for Libbok was goal kicking, and he absolutely nailed all of his kicks. Peerless stuff, so maybe a question answered there. On 64 minutes, just making another note, New Zealand just never kicking for position and trying to force the play in the middle of the pitch, and South Africa know this is coming now. They're shooting up in the passing lane super quickly, and another fumble for New Zealand, so they are not learning, but a masterclass from South Africa on how to play New Zealand if they're desperate to offload and overplay. 66 minutes, New Zealand are getting shredded by the South African line-out variations now. They're so petrified of that South African drive. They're getting picked off by all the variations. This time, Quagga Smith peeling off early, round the back for a great finish from him. 35-0, so these fresh forwards really making an impact, and maybe 7 forwards on the bench isn't such a crazy thing, especially for South Africa. Is it an actual strategy they could use? Then finally something for New Zealand, an individual amazing try from Cam Roygaard. I've been banging on about how amazing he is, what a talent he is, and he showed it, and he brushes off Moody, Willemse, Libbok, just a worldie of a score from a scrum half, and he's got to be in that 23 coming off the bench at least. Then another brilliant steal from Snyman, great line-out work once again. The scrum is absolutely on fire for South Africa. Great weapons that set piece was today, and I'm sure it will be in the World Cup. The South Africans are enjoying themselves. They know they've absolutely pumped their bitter rivals, and literally 2 minutes to go, and New Zealand actually finally go direct, get over the gain line a bit, get a bit of pressure near the South African line, but the ball is ripped away. A fitting end to the game. 35-7. Just amazing stuff from South Africa. New Zealand, they'll be absolutely gutted from this because they got absolutely pumped. Tactics were off, skills were off. That injury as well to Lomax is no good as well. So they've got to get better on their discipline for sure and think about how could they beat a team like South Africa, because this is not the way to do it. South Africa, brilliant stuff. Can they carry that into the World Cup? You'd think so on that sort of performance. Anyway, guys, let me know all the comments below on that game. I'd love to hear them as always, and I'll catch you next time.